I don't choose these stories. They find me. Listen carefully. Sarisariñama is difficult to reach and even harder to justify visiting twice. The tepui rises from the grand savanna like the back of something ancient turning in its sleep. A flat, impossible mesa surrounded by jungle that still doesn't appear on most civilian maps. I joined a scientific expedition as an external consultant. No one asked why someone like me was invited. No one wanted to ask. The Yiquana guide, Carrie P., only said one thing as we approached the rim. This mountain eats men. And what eats remembers. The scientist chuckled. I did not. Sahri. Our first night at the forward base near the mountain felt wrong from the moment the sun went down. We were still in the low jungle, staging equipment before the morning helicopter ascent. The summit loomed somewhere above the canopy, unseen but present. The wind died too quickly. The air felt too heavy. And then we heard it, a deep, resonant thud rolling through the stone beneath our feet. Not seismic, not echo, movement. Small tremors pushed stray pebbles across the ground. Moss was torn in straight, violent streaks, as if something had shifted beneath the crust of the plateau itself. Near the edge of the clearing, where the rock was exposed and worn smooth by centuries of rain, I noticed markings. At first I thought they were natural fractures, but they curved, almost erased by time. Shallow grooves etched into the stone, overlapping arcs and radial lines forming crude circular motifs. Not perfect, not symmetrical, uneven, as if carved in haste or under poor light. Petroglyphs, or something that wanted to resemble them. The central shape repeated, a ring-like form surrounded by elongated extensions, suggestive, disturbingly organic. Not art for decoration, more like a record. Nothing that lives here carves stone like that. Those marks were intentional, weathered, almost erased, but deliberate. If they were human, then someone stood on this summit long before us, saw something they could not fully explain, and chose not to draw beauty, but to leave a warning, a message to whoever would descend next. Sima Martel, also known as the Lesser Sima, is a vast natural sinkhole of the tinking type, carved into the summit of the Sarisariñama tepui in Venezuela. Hidden within the remote wilderness of Venezuelan National Park in Bolivar State, this immense chasm plunges dramatically into the heart of the ancient tabletop mountain, forming one of the most striking geological features in the region. The helicopter ride was unexpectedly smooth. The rotors hummed steadily above us as we lifted from the jungle clearing, rising into open air with barely a tremor. Below, the dense emerald canopy stretched endlessly, broken only by rivers that shimmered like threads of silver. We had been fortunate. The weather was on our side. The sky was clear, washed in pale blue, and the usual Amazonian mist had lifted just enough to grant us a wide, unobstructed view. Sunlight bathed the tepui's summit, illuminating the ancient rock in warm tones as we approached. There was no turbulence, no threatening clouds gathering on the horizon, only calm air and perfect visibility. It felt like rare permission from the landscape itself. On a journey where conditions can so easily turn unpredictable, that smooth flight and generous weather seemed less like a coincidence and more like quiet luck accompanying us toward the edge of the abyss. The descent into Sima Martel felt like entering a world built before our species learned fear. A whole forest waited at the bottom, trees untouched by wind or time. And yet it was silent. No insects, no birds, no life that moved the air. Then the air changed. Not wind, not sound, pressure. In the center of the clearing, a soft oval glow ignited without flame. Fluorescent white with a faint green undertone, like an aurora compressed into flesh. It hovered just above the ground, humming at a frequency felt more in the ribs than in the ears. The forest did not react. It seemed to expect it. The light stretched thin, membrane-like, and split. Shadows began to pour through. Not one form, many, elongated silhouettes, walking shapes with narrow legs and heavy torsos, bird-like figures moving upright, winged bodies folding and unfolding. Massive dark frames balanced on improbably small feet. They did not stumble. They scattered, running in all directions with frantic, instinctive urgency, as if released, not arriving. As if a biological migration were spilling from somewhere it no longer wished to remain. It was not chaos, it was exodus. For a few impossible seconds, the clearing resembled a living archive, forms crossing between dimensions like a distorted echo of an arc, species flowing through a wound in reality. Then the portal contracted. The oval shrank inward, tightening into a sphere of trembling light, hovering, pulsing once, twice, and vanished. Darkness returned with violent normalcy. The trees stood as before. The air felt heavy again. No footprints, no movement, only silence. It happened so quickly the mind struggled to assign sequence. And only then, only after the last trace of light disappeared, Curry P stepped back. He refused to move another meter. His voice trembled, not from superstition, but from recognition. It hates the light, and it hears your thoughts. I didn't know what that meant, but something had just arrived, and the forest had been waiting for it. The silence that followed was not empty. It was primed. For a moment, no one spoke. Then discipline overrode disbelief. Instruments were lifted, notes resumed, and the team forced itself back into routine, documenting samples, measuring humidity, pretending the forest had not just opened and closed like a wound. The clearing looked unchanged. The silence returned, and so everyone continued their mission. While documenting flora, one biologist stepped between two boulders and vanished from sight for half a second. Then he screamed. When we reached him, he was crumpled on the ground, shaking violently. His forearm had a perfect circular wound, a ring of missing flesh, smooth as if cut by suction. No tearing, no bite pattern, just absence. Something large moved between those rocks. Too fast for any human eye to capture, too silent for any natural predator. That night, something dragged its fingers across the nylon of our tents. Slowly, not scratching, not clawing, tracing. The fabric tightened inward with each pass, dimpling as if pressed by elongated joints. Shadows stretched across the thin membrane, distorted by the headlamp glow inside. Too long to be human, too deliberate to be random movement of wind. Long fingers, articulated, pausing at the seams, sliding along the zipper line, pressing where the poles bent the structure weakest, testing the fabric, testing our reaction. No breath, no growl, no impact, just pressure moving from tent to tent in patient sequence, as though whatever stood outside was mapping our positions, counting, learning the shape of us through nylon and fear. By morning, no one argued about staying longer. No one suggested another descent. No one spoke much at all. We moved quietly, packing equipment with the distracted efficiency of people who had already decided something without saying it aloud. The air felt heavier than it had the day before. Or maybe it was just us. Before we sealed the last case, I noticed it, caught on a splinter of fractured quartz near the rim. A clump of fine hair, almost translucent, not white, Not gray, more like something drained of color entirely. Thin albino strands that seemed to disappear against the light until they shifted in the breeze. It wasn't plant fiber. It wasn't insulation from our gear. And it wasn't there yesterday. A few meters away, in a patch of damp sediment protected from the wind, there was a partial print, only half preserved, for elongated digits, reverse jointed, the articulation wrong for any primate I know, built not for running, but for gripping, for climbing sheer stone. No drag marks, no stumble pattern, just placement, intentional, balanced, along several vertical cracks in the sinkhole wall. Sections of rock had been forced outward from within, not weathered, not eroded, fractured from internal pressure, the kind that builds slowly, persistently, as if something very strong had once occupied the deeper chambers and, at some point, decided to move upward. The fractures radiated toward the forest line. Legends don't carve quartzite from the inside. Legends don't leave keratin behind. Living things do. We were preparing to ascend back to the rim when the temperature dropped several degrees. Not wind, not shadow, a coordinated shift. The forest tightened. Then the rock began to move. Not one crack, many, along the vertical walls. Pale shapes pressed outward from fissures no wider than a hand. Stone fractured in thin lines as limbs unfolded from impossible angles, gripping the surface horizontally as if gravity were optional. There wasn't a single creature. There were several. 3, 5, more than I could count before instinct overrode observation. Pale gray bodies stretched across the rock face. Elongated limbs anchoring to stone. Reverse jointed legs flexing with mechanical precision. Circular mouths opening and closing in faint rhythmic pulses, ringed with barbs that trembled in the humid air. Their eyes reflected the thin daylight from above, not wild. Assessing. They did not rush. They descended, silently. One dropped to the forest floor without impact sound. Another remained suspended above us, parallel to the ground, studying from a height no human could balance at. And then they began to move between us, not attacking, positioning, encircling. A low vibration passed through the clearing, not heard, but felt along the spine. Several of them opened their mouths simultaneously, expelling a thin whisper that rippled across the rock. The sound multiplied, not one voice, a chorus, close, behind us, above us. That was when discipline collapsed. Someone shouted. A sample case hit the ground. One of the scientists stumbled backward and fell. Another dropped his camera and ran without looking where. The creatures accelerated, not toward us, around us, cutting off angles, blocking the path to the ropes. One lunged downward, landing meters away, its limbs absorbing impact like a spider striking stone. Another leapt from wall to wall in a blur of pale motion. That was enough. We ran, not in formation, not strategically, chaotically, boots slipping on wet rock, packs abandoned, someone screaming instructions no one followed. The forest, which had been silent for hours, now felt alive with movement. Pale forms crossing overhead, shadows darting between trees, circular mouths opening and closing in the dim light. It was not a confrontation. It was containment, and we had just realized we were inside it. We fled. There was no vote, no briefing, no final sweep of the perimeter. Panic simply condensed into movement. Hand grab packs. Straps were tightened without being checked. Someone dropped a carabiner and didn't bother retrieving it. The forest swallowed our retreat as if it had been waiting. No one ran at first. We just moved too fast. Then someone did run. and the rest followed. Branches snapped under boots. Breath turned sharp and mechanical. The helicopter was hours away, but distance, any distance, felt like a form of protection. Hours later, when the rotors finally faded behind us and the tepui was reduced to a flat silhouette against the horizon, Carrie P. spoke. He had been silent the entire descent. "It is not a spirit," he said quietly. "It is something older than spirits." No one corrected him. No one asked what he meant. The scientists looked at me, wide-eyed, pale beneath the dust, suddenly aware that their instruments had recorded more than data. Their discipline had edges, and we had just stepped beyond them. I realized something then. Not dramatic, not explosive, just quietly devastating. The sinkholes were sealed for millions of years. Isolated, vertical worlds without sunlight, without interruption. Whatever lives inside them is not supernatural. It's simply unaltered, a lineage that continued while the rest of the world changed. While mammals diversified, while primates stood upright, while we learned to name things and call them myths. Something that evolved without needing to resemble us. And when a life form becomes different enough, when its anatomy no longer fits our categories, when its behavior no longer fits our expectations, we stop calling it biology. We call it legend. I never told them everything I suspected. Some truths are too heavy for people who still want to sleep at night. But I told them the part that could be carried without breaking. Those creatures were not surprised to see us, I said. They didn't move like something encountering humans for the first time. There had been no chaotic retreat, no territorial display, no blind aggression. It had watched, measured distance, tracked movement, adjusted position with deliberate restraint. Predators react, prey flees, the unknown hesitates. This kind of creature did none of those. It behaved, I continued, like something that already understood what we are. I'll let that settle. Creatures don't study unless they've learned to be cautious. And caution requires history. One of the biologists started to object. Habituation models, rare contact hypotheses, convergent behavioral inference. All reasonable, all comforting. But the fractures in the rock, the placement of the print, the positioning in the dark, those were not the movements of instinct alone. They were the movements of something that knows risk. And then I gave him the thought that has stayed with me ever since. The Iguana weren't preserving a myth, I said quietly. They were preserving a memory. Oral traditions are often treated as metaphor, symbol, allegory. But what if, sometimes, they are simply records, compressed accounts of biological encounters repeated across generations until the explanation fades, but the warning remains. The sinkholes were sealed for millions of years. A closed system, an evolutionary chamber without interruption. Isolation does not create magic. It creates divergence. Lineages adapt in silence. Morphologies drift. Sensory systems specialize in darkness. Behavior becomes patient. Given enough time, biology stops resembling what we expect. And when something becomes different enough, we call it legend. Humans didn't discover Sarisariñama. We mapped it. We named it. We photographed it from above. But long before helicopters and headlamps, long before geology gave an age, something inside those vertical forests may have reached the rim, looked out at the canopy, and seen us moving below. If that is true, then the order of discovery is reversed. We did not find it. It found us first. And afterward, something stranger happened. None of the witnesses spoke about it. Not in the helicopter, not in the reports, not in the months that followed. The data was archived. The samples were cataloged. The expedition was summarized in safe, sterile language. But the event itself, the coordination, the emergence, the portal, dissolved into omission. It wasn't denial. It was restraint, as if everyone had silently agreed that remembering it too clearly would reopen something best left sealed, almost as if forgetting was part of the survival response. The case ends here, for now. Reality bends more easily than people can imagine,